High Advisor Zek'thar adjusted his ceremonial sash for the 13th time in the past hour, his four-fingered hands smoothing over the shimmering material with practiced disdain. From his privileged position in the Federation Assembly's upper observation deck, he watched the proceedings below with the kind of attention usually reserved for examining particularly disappointing bacterial cultures. Simply fascinating, he muttered to his aide, Commander Vreeks, his bioluminescent spots pulsing a gentle shade of mockery. The humans actually managed to dress themselves properly for the ceremony, though I noticed they're still wearing those absurd pieces of metal on their chests, probably to compensate for their fragile skeletal structure. The massive chamber of the Galactic Federation's central hall buzzed with the kind of energy that only came with admitting a new species into the fold. Representatives from over 300 civilizations filled the tiered seating, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of scales, feathers, and crystalline structures. At the center of it all stood the Earth delegation, looking comically small next to the towering Archeans and the ethereal Quantum Collective. Did you know? Zek'thar continued, his upper eye ridge twitching with barely contained amusement. Their primary military training still involves physically running across their planet's surface. Like primitive herd animals, they don't even use gravitational manipulation fields for basic conditioning. Commander Vreeks dutifully entered the observation into his datapad, though his secondary breathing holes wheezed slightly the closest his species came to sighing. Perhaps, High Advisor, they have their reasons. Oh please, Zek'thar's spots flashed bright orange with derision. I've reviewed their combat footage. They still use projectile weapons that rely on chemical propulsion. Chemical propulsion. Next, you'll tell me they've mastered the art of throwing pointy sticks. Below, the human delegation stood at attention as the Federation Council read the terms of admission. At their head stood Captain Maya Chen, her dress uniform crisp, despite the chamber's humid atmosphere calibrated for the comfort of the Council's predominantly amphibian members. Look at their military liaison, Zek'thar sneered, standing there like some kind of load-bearing support column, so rigid, so inflexible. The mark of an underdeveloped tactical mind if I ever saw one. Captain Chen chose that exact moment to glance up at the observation deck. Despite the distance, despite the supposedly one-way transparent barrier, her eyes locked directly onto Zek'thar's position. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth, the kind of expression that would have sent warning signals through any human observer's hindbrain. Zek'thar, unfortunately lacking the evolutionary context to recognize the danger sign, merely added another note to his growing list of human inadequacies, and their facial muscles appear to be malfunctioning. Is that some kind of stress response? Actually, Commander Vreeks ventured, I believe humans call that a primitive display of submission. No doubt, Zek'thar interrupted, waving one hand dismissively. Well, they'll learn proper civilization soon enough. The Federation's mandatory military assessment is coming up, and guess who's been assigned as their evaluator? His spots pulsed with smug satisfaction as he watched Captain Chen continue her unwavering stare. I give them 2 solar cycles before they're begging for Federation protection. These humans, they're simply not cut out for the rigors of modern galactic warfare. Did you know they still practice something called hand-to-hand combat? As if any civilized species would let themselves get close enough to touch during battle. The ceremony concluded with the traditional harmonic resonance of the Federation chorus, a sound that made human teeth vibrate and internal organs shift uncomfortably. Captain Chen's smile never wavered, even as several of her colleagues winced. Well, Zek'thar straightened his sash a 14th time. At least they're providing some entertainment value. Come, Commander. Let's prepare for tomorrow's assessment. I want to document their primitive practices thoroughly. Future species might find it educational to learn what not to do. As they turned to leave, Commander Vreeks couldn't help but notice that Captain Chen's smile had grown just a fraction wider. For some reason, it made his survival instincts tingle in a most disturbing way. The Federation's assessment center loomed before them like a monument to advanced civilization, all gleaming quantum glass and probability-warped architecture. Zek'thar strode through its reality-bending corridors with the confidence of someone who had failed countless species military evaluations and expected today to be no different. You understand, he lectured the human delegation trailing behind him, that these assessments are merely a formality. Most newly admitted species require at least a decade of Federation protection before their military capabilities reach even minimal standards. Captain Chen walked beside him, her boots clicking against the mathematically perfect floor in an oddly rhythmic pattern. "Of course, High Advisor. We're just grateful for the opportunity to learn from your expertise." "As you should be." Zek'thar's spots flickered with patronizing approval. "Though I must say, your choice of assessment location is peculiar. This Fort Benning appears to be nothing more than a collection of primitive structures on your planet's surface." "We thought you might appreciate seeing our traditional training methods," Chen replied, checking something on her archaic wrist-mounted chronometer. "We've prepared a comprehensive demonstration." The quantum tunnel deposited them at the heart of the human military facility. Zek'thar's upper eye ridge twitched violently at the sight of actual dirt beneath his gravity-assisted hover platform. Around them, dozens of human soldiers moved with purpose, their activities incomprehensible to his advanced military mind. "What are they doing?" he demanded, watching a group run past carrying heavy objects on their backs. "Is this some form of punishment?" "That's just Thursday," came a new voice, deep and resonating with the kind of authority that made even alien spines straighten involuntarily. First Lieutenant Raj Patterson emerged from a nearby structure, his dark skin gleaming with sweat, combat fatigues bearing the dust of active participation in whatever primitive rituals he'd been overseeing. Unlike the ceremonial rigidity of Captain Chen, Patterson moved with the fluid grace of a predator, each step precisely calculated despite appearing completely casual. High Advisor Patterson nodded, somehow making the respectful gesture feel like a challenge. "Welcome to my playground." Zek'thar's translator stumbled over the last word, finally settling on educational torture facility as the closest equivalent. "Ah, you must be the drill instructor? How quaint that you still use mechanical boring devices in your training." Patterson's laugh sent nearby birds scattering. "Oh, you're going to be fun." He turned to Captain Chen. "Permission to proceed with the demonstration, Ma. I am." "Permission granted, Lieutenant." "Try not to break our guests' perception of reality too quickly." "No promises, Ma." Patterson faced Zek'thar, his grin revealing too many teeth for the alien's comfort. "Let's start with something simple. Would you like to observe our obstacle course?" Commander Vreeks, who had been quietly analyzing the facility's complete lack of neural enhancement stations or psychic combat arrays, perked up. "Ah, yes, physical barriers for testing mobility enhancement equipment." "Something like that," Patterson replied, leading them toward what appeared to be a series of deliberately constructed impediments. "Though we do it a bit differently here." Zek'thar's spots pulsed with disbelief as they approached the course. "Where are the force fields? The gravity wells? The phase shift challenges?" "Don't need EM," Patterson said, just as a group of soldiers attacked the course. They moved with savage grace, scaling walls, crawling under razor wire, and navigating complex rope systems with nothing but their natural abilities and minimal equipment. Barbaric Zek'thar declared, his hover platform backing away slightly. "You can't possibly expect to develop effective warriors through such physical means." Patterson's smile grew predatory. "Oh, this isn't about developing warriors, High Advisor. This is just the warm-up." He checked his own primitive chronometer, matching Captain Chen's earlier gesture. "The real demonstration begins in exactly 47 minutes. "Real demonstration?" Commander Vreeks asked, his survival instincts now screaming in harmony with his curiosity. "You said you wanted to evaluate our combat readiness," Captain Chen interjected smoothly. "Lieutenant Patterson has prepared a proper display of human military capabilities. Nothing too overwhelming, of course. We wouldn't want to strain your advanced tactical understanding." Zek'thar missed the sarcasm entirely, his spots glowing with anticipated amusement. Yes, show us your best efforts. Though I doubt anything could surpass the elegant simplicity of psychic bombardment or quantum-entangled warfare." Patterson and Chen exchanged a look that spoke volumes in human body language, but registered as meaningless muscle spasms to their alien observers. "Trust me, High Advisor," Patterson said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of human combat evolution. "We've got something special planned just for you." The dirt beneath their feet trembled slightly, carrying vibrations from some distant activity. Zek'thar dismissed it as primitive tectonic instability, completely missing the predatory anticipation in every human stance around him. He had evaluated 17 species before this one, and none had ever surprised him. He was about to learn why humans had a saying about pride coming before a fall. News of the human military demonstration spread through the Federation's observation team like a quantum virus through unshielded systems. Soon, the modest viewing area overlooking the training grounds swelled with curious alien dignitaries, each hoping to witness what they assumed would be an amusing display of primitive warfare techniques. "I hear they still use integrated muscle groups for weapon control," a helix mind researcher whispered to their crystalline companion, neural pathways sparkling with amusement. "How charmingly obsolete," the crystalline being chimed back. "Next, they'll tell us they rely on biological eyes for targeting." Below, Lieutenant Patterson had begun what he called a basic hand-to-hand demonstration. 2 human soldiers circled each other on a rectangular mat, their movements precise and controlled. "Fascinating," Zek'thar commented from his elevated position. "They appear to be practicing ritual dance movements, perhaps a pre-battle ceremonial." His words cut off as one soldier executed a lightning-fast sweep, sending the other airborne in a controlled arc that ended with a thunderous impact. "That was Specialist Zhang demonstrating a basic hip throw," Patterson explained, his casual tone belied by the gleam in his eyes. "Nothing fancy, just a little something for close-quarter situations." Commander Vrix's data pad trembled slightly in his hands, but the kinetic energy transfer, without technological assistance, that should have caused significant skeletal damage. "Nah," Patterson waved off the concern. "They're both fine. We trained to take falls." As if to prove his point, both soldiers popped up and began another exchange, their movements a brutal ballet of strikes, blocks, and throws. The alien audience grew larger, now including several Federation military theorists who had originally dismissed the demonstration as beneath their notice. They watched with growing unease as humans demonstrated what Patterson called basic combatives. "Surely," Zek'thar interjected, his spots pulsing erratically, "you don't expect these primitive grappling techniques to be effective against modern warfare systems." Captain Chen, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, stepped forward. "Of course not, High Advisor. This is just physical conditioning. Perhaps you'd be more interested in our weapons demonstration." A new group of soldiers emerged onto the field, carrying what Zek'thar had earlier dismissed as primitive projectile weapons. The aliens leaned forward, expecting a quaint display of obsolete technology. What they got was a symphony of precision and violence. The soldiers moved through a series of drills, their weapons becoming extensions of their bodies. They transitioned from standing to prone, from cover to cover, maintaining accurate fire, while moving in patterns that seemed chaotic but contained an underlying logic that nagged at the edges of even the most advanced alien tactical systems. "Inefficient," Zek'thar declared, though his hover platform had drifted backward several meters. "The energy expenditure alone." "Would you like to see the accuracy scores?" Patterson interrupted, projecting a holographic display that even the aliens' advanced systems had to admit was impressive. "Or perhaps a demonstration of our room-clearing techniques?" A quantum collective representative rippled with disturbance. "You mean you actually enter enclosed spaces during combat? Without sending drone swarms or probability phantoms?" "We find the personal touch more effective," Chen replied with that same unsettling smile she'd worn during the admission ceremony. The gathered aliens murmured among themselves as Patterson checked his chronometer again. 10 minutes until the main event, he announced. "I suggest our honored guests make their way to the primary observation post. You'll want an unobstructed view for this next part. I've arranged for several of our most distinguished military theorists to witness the demonstration," Zek'thar announced, trying to regain his authoritative tone. "They're quite eager to document your unique approaches." "The more the merrier," Patterson replied, using an idiom that translated into alien languages as a mildly threatening statement about increased witness counts. "Though I should warn you, what you're about to see might challenge some fundamental assumptions about combat effectiveness." More alien observers arrived, their various forms of transportation creating a traffic jam in the quantum tunnels. The viewing area grew crowded with beings who had come to scoff but were beginning to experience the first tickles of doubt. "Remember," Chen addressed the gathered audience, her voice carrying subtle harmonics that made several psychically sensitive species flinch, "this demonstration is rated for Federation military observers only. Some of what you're about to witness might be intense for civilian sensibilities." A ripple of nervous energy passed through the crowd. Zek'thar's spots had settled into a confused pattern of colors that suggested his smug certainty was battling with newly awakened instincts. "If you'll direct your attention to the main training area," Patterson announced, "Ghost Team is ready to begin their demonstration of actual human combat capabilities." His grin hadn't wavered, but it had taken on an edge that made even artificial intelligences among the observers experience the digital equivalent of goosebumps. The ground trembled again, stronger this time, and in the distance, something that sounded suspiciously like thunder rolled across the Georgia landscape. But the sky was clear, and that rumbling seemed to have a mechanical overtone that none of the alien observers could quite identify. They were about to discover exactly why humans smiled before they struck. The combat arena sprawled across 2 square kilometers of carefully engineered terrain. From the observation post's elevated position, the alien delegates could see everything: urban combat zones with partially destroyed buildings, dense forest segments, underground tunnel networks exposed by strategic cutaways, and what appeared to be a mock spacecraft crash site. "Welcome to the playground," Lieutenant Patterson announced, his voice carrying across the now hushed crowd. "What you're looking at is our most advanced combat training facility. The terrain is reconfigurable, the targets are reactive, and the environmental conditions can be altered in real time." Zek'thar's spots pulsed with renewed confidence. Finally, something approaching modern standards. "I assume you use quantum probability fields too." "Hydraulics." Actually, Chen interrupted. "Old school. Reliable." A horrified murmur rippled through the alien observers. Several crystalline beings vibrated with distress at the thought of such primitive technology. The rumbling grew stronger, and from behind a manufactured hillside emerged a column of vehicles that made Zek'thar's spots flash in disbelief. "Are those internal combustion engines, rolling on physical contact points with the ground?" "We call them wheels," Patterson grinned. "Ghost Team prefers the classics." The vehicle's a mix of modified Humvees and something the aliens' translation systems, simply labeled as incomprehensible death machine, came to a stop at the arena's edge. From them emerged 6 figures in combat gear that seemed offensively simple to the alien observers. "Where are their personal shield generators?" a Helix mind researcher demanded. "The neural enhancement arrays? The probability manipulation fields?" "Ghost Team doesn't believe in shortcuts," Patterson replied. He keyed his comm unit. "Ghost Lead, you're cleared to begin equipment check. Show our guests your loadout." The team spread out their gear with military precision. Their weapons, a mix of ballistic and energy systems that somehow managed to look both primitive and lethally purposeful, were arranged with methodical care. Each member wore armor that seemed inadequately thin to the alien sensors. "Allow me to introduce Ghost Team." Chen stepped forward. Specialist Victoria Phantom Kovalov, demolitions and heavy weapons. Corporal Marcus Shadow Rodriguez, infiltration and close quarters combat. Lieutenant James Wraith O'Neill, tactical systems and electronic warfare. Sergeant Ayesha Spectre Williams, sniper and long-range reconnaissance. Private First Class Kai Spirit Chen, combat engineering and support. And their leader, Master Sergeant David Ghost Anderson. Each soldier nodded as they were introduced, their movements carrying the kind of fluid efficiency that came from years of combat experience. Master Sergeant Anderson stepped forward, and even through their various sensory systems, the alien observers could tell this was someone who had mastered the art of controlled violence. Ghost Team Anderson's voice carried easily across the field. "Prep for Scenario Echo 7 Delta. Full combat load, unrestricted engagement protocols." Zek'thar's translator struggled with several terms but managed to convey the general meaning. "Unrestricted? Surely you don't mean." "Full contact, full speed, full force," Patterson confirmed. "Ghost Team doesn't do demonstrations. They do missions." The arena systems hummed to life. Holographic overlays added enemy combatants, environmental hazards, and mission objectives throughout the complex. The aliens watched in confusion as Ghost Team loaded their weapons with what appeared to be simple solid projectiles. Those rounds, a quantum collective representative oscillated with amusement. "They're not even phase shifted. How do you expect to engage quantum state targets with physical ammunition?" Anderson looked up at the observation post, his expression unreadable behind tactical goggles. "Watch and learn." The team moved to their vehicles, each member performing final equipment checks that seemed ridiculously basic to the alien observers. No neural interface synchronization, no probability field attunement, not even basic psychic shielding. The scenario parameters are simple. Patterson explained as environmental systems began generating smoke and atmospheric effects. Ghost Team must penetrate enemy defenses, secure critical intelligence, eliminate high-value targets, and extract all while dealing with active opposition, environmental hazards, and system warfare. System warfare, Zek'thar scoffed. With their primitive electronic interfaces? Impossible. Our most basic quantum AI could. Lieutenant O'Neill chose that moment to activate something in his equipment array. Instantly, every alien data pad, sensor system, and communication device within range experienced a cascade of errors. The devices recovered quickly, but the implications sent a wave of unease through the audience. As I was saying, Patterson continued, seemingly oblivious to the aliens' discomfort. Ghost Team will now demonstrate actual human combat capabilities. I should mention that their current loadout is considered light by our standards. The arena's environmental systems kicked into high gear. Rain began falling in sheets across certain sectors while others blazed with simulated fire. The holographic enemies took up defensive positions, their patterns based on actual combat data from 17 different species. Begin mission clock. Anderson's voice cut through the growing storm. Ghost Team, weapons free. Let's show our guests how humans fight. The aliens watched in growing confusion as Ghost Team split up, taking positions that seemed to ignore basic tactical doctrine. Their vehicles' primitive engines roared to life, spewing actual combustion products into the atmosphere. This is absurd, Zek'thar declared, though his hover platform had drifted even further from the arena's edge. They can't possibly expect to achieve mission objectives with such. His voice trailed off as Ghost Team began to move. What happened next would fundamentally change the Galactic Federation's understanding of warfare. Ghost Team exploded into action with synchronized violence that made several alien observers activate their emergency stabilization fields. The vehicles split apart in a maneuver that appeared chaotic but contained lethal precision, each one heading to a different sector of the combat zone. Impossible, Zek'thar whispered, as Specialist Kovalev's vehicle smashed through a reinforced barrier that should have required quantum displacement to breach. Their primitive locomotion system shouldn't be capable of. His analysis cut short as Lieutenant O'Neill's electronic warfare suite came fully online. Half the alien observation system suddenly displayed either static or, more disturbingly, exactly what O'Neill wanted them to see. How a helix mind researcher demanded. They're using basic electromagnetic principles. Our quantum encryption should. Ghost 3. Breachpoint Charlie confirmed. Anderson's voice crackled through the command net. Spectre, you have Overwatch. Phantom, make some noise. What followed was a masterclass in synchronized chaos. Sergeant Williams vanished into a hidden position so effectively that even the alien's most advanced sensors lost track of her. Moments later, holographic enemies began dropping with precision shots from constantly changing positions. Kovalev's noise turned out to be a series of precisely calculated explosions that somehow managed to disrupt both physical and quantum state targets. The aliens watched in growing horror as their most advanced combat simulations were systematically dismantled by what they had dismissed as primitive explosives. They're not following any known tactical doctrine, Commander Vreeks observed, his professional curiosity overriding his unease. Their movements should be predictable, yet. Private Chen's combat engineering skills interrupted that thought as an entire section of the battlefield reconfigured itself through what appeared to be improvised mechanical means. Holographic enemies found their quantum probability fields useless against good old-fashioned terrain manipulation. Pattern recognition impossible, a quantum collective representative vibrated with distress. Their chaos contains patterns within patterns. Corporal Rodriguez demonstrated why humans had perfected close-quarters combat as he cleared a mock building. His movements flowed like liquid death, each action leading seamlessly into the next. The aliens watched in stunned silence as he eliminated quantum state targets with nothing more than precisely applied kinetic force. Notice Patterson commented casually how they're adapting their tactics in real time. No neural networks, no AI assistance, just human intuition and training. Zek'thar's spots had gone pale, displaying a color pattern that in his species indicated severe cognitive dissonance. But their weapons, their equipment, everything about their methods defies advanced combat theory. That's kind of the point. Captain Chen smiled. The enemy can't predict what you'll do if your actions don't follow any predictable pattern of logic. Ghost Team continued their demonstration, their coordination reaching levels that should have required psychic links or at least quantum entanglement. Instead, they operated on what Patterson called gut instinct and having each other's backs. Ghost Lead, multiple hostiles converging on your position. William's voice came through, followed by the sharp crack of her rifle eliminating threats no one else had even spotted yet. Acknowledged, Anderson replied, his team smoothly shifting to counter the new threat. Shadow, Phantom, collapse the pocket. Spirit, give them something to think about. The battlefield erupted in a coordinated display of human combat effectiveness that had several alien military theorists frantically rewriting tactical doctrines. Each team member's actions complemented the others perfectly, creating a symphony of controlled destruction that somehow made their primitive methods seem vastly superior to over-engineered advanced weapons. Zek'thar's hover platform had backed up against the observation post's far wall. His spots now displayed a pattern that hadn't been seen in his species since their early evolutionary encounters with apex predators. He was beginning to understand why humans smiled before combat. Final phase initiated. Anderson's voice cut through the chaos. Ghost Team, Convergence Protocol. What followed could only be described as orchestrated mayhem. The scattered team members suddenly moved as one, their seemingly random positions revealing themselves as points in a perfectly planned geometric trap. Every piece of terrain they'd modified, every enemy they'd redirected, every system they'd disrupted, all of it had been building to this moment. By the quantum core breathed a crystalline observer, its structure vibrating with shock. They turned the entire battlefield into a weapon. The holographic enemies, programmed with the most advanced combat algorithms in the Federation, found themselves caught in a three-dimensional web of overlapping fields of fire, pre-planned demolition zones, and killing grounds that had been crafted through nothing more than human ingenuity and old-fashioned explosive engineering. Ghost Team, execute, Anderson commanded. 5 simultaneous explosions reshaped the battlefield. Sergeant Williams' sniper fire herded surviving enemies into precisely calibrated kill zones. Lieutenant O'Neill's electronic warfare suite turned their own quantum communications against them. Private Chen's engineering traps sprung in sequence, each one driving targets exactly where Corporal Rodriguez and Specialist Kovalov waited. The entire operation took exactly 12 seconds. When the dust settled, not a single holographic enemy remained functional. Ghost Team had achieved every mission objective with nothing more than what Zek'thar had dismissed as primitive tools and outdated tactics. Zek'thar's spots had gone completely white, a sign of total cognitive surrender in his species. How did they? That's the thing about humans, Patterson said quietly, his earlier grin replaced by a look of professional pride. We don't need quantum probability fields to understand chaos. We don't need neural enhancements to act as one. We've spent our entire history learning to fight smarter, not fancier. The alien observers stood in stunned silence as Ghost Team regrouped at their vehicles, performing casual equipment checks, as if they hadn't just rewritten the Federation's understanding of combat effectiveness. I believe Captain Chen addressed Zek'thar. You mentioned something about evaluating our combat readiness. For the first time in his long career as a Federation military advisor, Zek'thar found himself completely speechless. His spots, however, had begun displaying a pattern that translated roughly as profound respect tinged with healthy fear. Commander Vreeks, showing more wisdom than his superior, simply began writing his report. Its first line read, "Recommend immediate revision of Federation combat doctrines regarding human military capabilities. Previous assumptions were catastrophically incorrect." 1 week later, in the Federation's Central Hall, Zek'thar stood before the Military Assessment Council. His spots, still not quite recovered from their shock, pulsed in gentle patterns of submission as he delivered his final report. In conclusion, his voice carried none of its former condescension. I recommend Earth be classified as a Category 1 military-capable species. Their combat readiness score, he paused, his spots flickering with remembered awe, is the highest we've recorded in 3 centuries of evaluations. Captain Chen and Lieutenant Patterson stood at parade rest, their expressions professional, but with just a hint of that distinctly human smile that Zek'thar now understood wasn't a muscle malfunction at all. Furthermore, he continued, I strongly suggest the Federation consider implementing human training methodologies into our standard combat protocols. Their approach to warfare is uniquely effective. The council chambers erupted in excited discussion. Never before had a newly admitted species received such a glowing combat assessment. As the council members debated the implications, Commander Vreeks leaned over to his superior. I believe, High Advisor, humans have a saying about judging books by their covers. Zek'thar's spots flashed a pattern of rueful agreement. Indeed, though personally I prefer their other saying. Oh, the one about the last laugh.